In 2014, myself, former Representative Chris Taylor, Representative David Bowen, and Representative Evan Goki started working on the use of force legislative package because we knew something needed to be done. We worked on this legislation for 3 years before introducing it in 2017 after the death of Seville Smith and the Sherman Park uprising. We introduced this legislation for 2 consecutive sessions, and it never so much as received a hearing because it was written by liberals. Now, in 2020, after witnessing Jacob Blake being shot in the back 7 times in front of his 3 small children, after 3 protesters were shot by a 17-year-old vigilante, 2 of which died, after seeing Kenosha being thrown into the spotlight for countless fires and millions of dollars worth of damage, we are here today as Democrats, as members of the Black Caucus, asking Republicans to help us do our job and help the state of Wisconsin because we understand the urgency of addressing this issue and the need to create use-of-force police reform. We know firsthand it's not a matter of if it'll ever happen again, but when. We understand the need to make these encounters safer, not only for those being stopped and detained, but for those good officers who are simply trying to do their jobs and return home safely to their families. Creating uniform statewide policies and procedures will help ensure the safety and consistency, as well as help to restore and improve community police relations. But it's not just about police policy. It's about addressing disparities in our Black and brown communities that have existed for decades and have continually been allowed to get worse. We have seen COVID-19 ravage communities of color, killing innocent victims because of poor health outcomes from a result of systematic inequality. Blacks living in Milwaukee County are 5.7 times more likely to die from COVID-19. 1 out of 2,000 Black Wisconsinites died compared to 1 out of 4,700 whites. That disparity for Blacks is the 3rd worst in America. African American babies die at a rate of 18.1 per 1,000 compared to 3.6 per 1,000 white babies. Black children living in poverty in this state is 42.4% compared to 8.7% of white children. And in 2014, Wisconsin was ranked the worst place in America to raise an African American child. These are the statistics facing my community every single day. We no longer can sit idly by while Republicans continue to treat our lives, our people, our communities as if they don't matter. Republicans need to find the morality to address these issues, not just the use of force reform, but the disparities facing our communities of color. We don't need a study committee to verify what we already know. We need action, and we need Republicans to do their damn jobs. Next, I will bring up State Representative Kalan Haywood.
All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Wisconsin State Representative Kalan Haywood II. I am George Floyd. I am Breonna Taylor. I am Fidel Castro. I am Eric Garner. I am Dontre Hamilton. I am Seville Smith. I am Joe Acevedo. And I am Jacob Blake. Those are just a few of the names of the Black and brown people who have been shot and or murdered at the hands of law enforcement over the course of the last several years. And if we take those murders and those shootings and do them all on the same day, we will call them a mass shooting. But because they're on different days, we don't do that. But that's exactly what it is. Black and brown communities have lived through a mass shooting for decades. I have lived through a mass shooting my entire life. Which is why I ask, when will enough be enough? When it comes to other issue areas, we find solutions. When we have a problem with drunk drivers, we change policy. When we have a problem with animal abuse, we change policy. When we have a problem with our voter laws, we change policy. So why is it that when men, women, children, black and brown people are being murdered, we don't change policy? We're faced with barriers, excuses, political posturing, and every reason in the world why we can't make change. But let me be clear, perfectly clear. I'm not saying that every sworn officer is a bad apple or a bad cop. But just like a classroom, let's say a crowded public school classroom of 30 students, if there's one or two bad students, it impacts the entire classroom. So there are a few bad apples in our police force, and that impacts the entire police force. So we must address excessive force immediately. We must address those bad apples promptly. And we must also assist those good apples in assisting us in making that happen. As elected officials, we take an oath and we must operate in a way that uplifts everyone we represent. We must make sure we correct policy that not only protects human life, but uplifts it. And there's a saying in the business community. You can tell what a person cares about by identifying the causes and issues they support financially. So I'm going to adopt that policy for me and my colleagues, both locally and nationally. We will be able to identify what issues and what causes you care about most by where you invest your policy changes. We need housing reform. We need healthcare reform. We need workforce reform. And right now we need police reform immediately. It needs to happen now, not yesterday, or definitely yesterday, but not tomorrow, not next session. Like, it needs to happen now. We need to make sure when we change these policies, we're ensuring that Black lives matter in every way, shape, and form. Thank you.
That man needs no introduction.
So next I'll bring up my colleague, my friend, my old boss, Representative David Bowen.
For the record, Representative Haywood did not work for me that long. He came up here to join me as a colleague, and I'm proud of him. I'm State Representative David Bowen. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues from the Democratic side of the Assembly. Just days ago, I witnessed white supremacists driving around Kenosha. And what's ironic of how there's so much of a target on the backs of people that are protesting, advocating for change, demanding that this system be accountable to Black people. It has brought out, I would say, the evils of this world, has brought out the worst in people to try to oppose that. To be honest and accountable, we already had that discussion. And there's no sides. There are no fine people that are white supremacists or a side to take. There was really only one side. There's a side that won that war. And it's a Union versus Confederacy. And folks that were a part of the Confederacy are still trying to relive, still trying to change the history books, still trying to, I would say, seek revenge. This is a time for us to move forward. This is a time for us to actually build systems that can be accountable to the same people that they want to kill. So what we are witnessing is the unraveling of the accountability of law enforcement in this country, in this state. People that are defending the status quo of making it okay to kill and hurt Black people and people of color. And one of the things that we cannot stand for is for a system that currently wants no accountability, currently does not want to rise to the occasion to actually transform and to be more accountable. So that means it needs to be replaced. That means it needs to be transformed. We are not asking for anything major from our colleagues. We're asking for fairness and equity in a system that needs to be accountable. And if the state legislature is rejecting these 9 bills from the governor, if they are going to gavel in and gavel out and not give the seriousness this issue deserves, that means that we must move forward even with bigger changes, even with more substantial changes to transform what public safety looks and feels like in the state of Wisconsin and across this nation. Jacob Blake was protecting his community that day. An officer showed up to fire 7 shots in his back in front of his children, making him the problem, making him the issue. So it is long past the time for us to wait on our colleagues to get it. If they gavel in and gavel out today, that means they get it quite well. They understand that their silence on this issue, their inaction on this issue, sides with white supremacists. And I've had conversations with my colleagues that have called me after I put out a press release to hold everybody accountable, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. And they talked about being scared of being called racist, being hesitant on being seen as opposed to taking the right side. And the best thing that they can do is to lead with their actions. And they get a chance to do that today. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of confidence that we are in a place where we literally will see that. So there are so many community groups and so many folks and leaders that are coming here today to say that their inaction will not stop their motivation of continuing to advocate, continuing to protest, continuing to fight for the change that we deserve. And I'm proud of them. I'm proud of the people that are now marching on the 95th day to say that we have to transform this system and we have to ensure that accountability will be once and for all, and that we don't have to leave this on our children to figure out. People across the state of Wisconsin deserve that future. People across this nation deserve that future, and it must be embraced even at the highest office in the land with a president that continues to stoke the flames of hate. We must be able to move this forward. And it starts right here in this building. It starts right here with our colleagues in the Assembly and in the Senate. Thank you. And I want to introduce State Representative Shelia Stubbs of Madison.
Thank you, Representative Bowen. Yes. I'm just going to move mics for a moment, but I will project as loud as I can. Wisconsin is in a crisis. Once again, our entire state heard the bullets of law enforcement fire into an unarmed black man. The 7 shots that struck Jacob Blake in front of his children will forever be carved into the memory of our beloved community. But remembering means nothing if we do not work to end the systemic injustice that met Jacob that fatal night. The blame for Jacob Blake's shooting does not fall at the hands of just this one officer, and let me be clear. That day, our community was failed by leaders in action. Our leaders who have long overlooked the systemic injustices in our policing system. They failed us. Our leaders who refuse to make investments into, yes, the black communities, and yes, to support black lives. Our leaders who see nothing wrong with the status quo, and they refuse to change and reconsider the change. But this is the status quo they defend. In 2019, 44% of black male population in prison were blacks, despite black people only making up 7% of WisconsinEye. Something's wrong with that picture. Meanwhile, black for high school graduation for blacks was 22.5% lower than white graduation rate. In addition, black families have a median yearly income that is less than half of our white counterparts. These statistics are damaging. They are unacceptable. They are directly tied, and I said it, to racism inherent in our status quo. My colleagues and I, that's standing right here, have worked hard, day in and day out, to create legislation to help our communities prosper. The bills that the Wisconsin Black Legislative Caucus created, and we forwarded a list of bills, and the governor moved forward 9 bills, have told that the legislator considered would be the step towards a more just and a more equitable way of policing. As a black legislator, and the only black legislator from Madison, we have seen the injustice of our policing system firsthand. I myself was racially profiled. I myself had the police called on me right here in Madison. I myself worked hard to make sure a bill would be created. That's a part of my healing process. These scenarios are extremely traumatic. And a part of my healing process was to get in this building and go to work and craft a bill that no other black across the state of Wisconsin, no other brown person, have to experience racial profiling. And that is one of the bills that's included. While our criminal justice reform package is a step, it's only a step in the right direction, it is not the only way we can make our community better. If we truly believe that Black lives matter, then we need to invest in our black communities. We need to invest in our black businesses. We need to invest in our black education. And equity cannot be achieved if we do not invest in uplifting up of those that currently are underserved. Just over 57 years ago, civil rights leaders marched on Washington for jobs and freedom. That day, 200,000 people marched to demand civil and economic justice for black Americans. That day, the late U.S. Representative John Lewis said, and I quote, "If we do not gain meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We must follow in his footsteps, and we must demand action in this state legislature from the Republicans. We have already lost too many black lives from preventable gun violence and police violence. How many more lives do we have to lose across the state of Wisconsin? Just here in Madison, we lost a precious 11-year-old Anissa Scott to gun violence here in Madison. We just had her funeral a week ago. In Madison, we turned out with unification because we are demanding action. We must continue to echo the names of Breonna Taylor and Eric Gardner and George Floyd and Philander Castro, and yes, Tony Robinson, right here in Madison, who was gunned down in this very city. How many more lives have to be taken because of inaction from this place? It is injustice of tearing down the fabric of our communities. Here today, we have community organizers from across the state that are crying out with us for action. We are pleading for our leaders to take our grievances seriously and to work towards creating a better world for all. I certainly want to thank you all for coming here today. I would be remiss if I didn't say it loud and clear that Wisconsin is the worst state to raise a black family. Yet 44% of our black children are living in poverty. Yet 13.2% of black children in Wisconsin are found to have elevated blood lead levels. We must dismantle and break down these barriers because they are fatal. Wisconsin has the highest infant mortality rate for black babies nationwide. It is no small part because of the lack of resources and the stress from institutional racism and yes, sexism. But do you think that's okay? Do you think that should be the status quo? We must recognize and neglect trauma and harm that communities of color across Wisconsin have endured for generations and generations. We must take reparative steps to bring forth urgent relief to our communities so that we can begin to heal from wounds that have been created. And at the end of that, I just want to leave you with a quick quote, one that I learned that means so much to me. And it's by Dr. Benjamin Elijah Maines, and it says, I have only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it, forced upon me, can't refuse it, I didn't seek it, I didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I will suffer if I lose it, give account if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, and it's in there, and yet eternity is in it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to say that James Baldwin said to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to always be in a current state of rage. We are here to express our rage today, and we want to make sure that equity happens in this state across the board. Thank you so much.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.